I would say the biggest learning that I've taken is to treat pivots the way basketball players searching for the ball. You can't make a pivot on all three dimensions at the same time. Maybe you can, I certainly have, but it is a lot easier or feasible to do it when you focus on one at a time. So I try to focus, where am I strongest? Where's my footing? So it could be, is it my industry expertise? Is it my functional expertise? Or is it like the geography where I'm at, where my network is strongest? So for anyone navigating a change, I would ask you to just lean into one of those three dimensions and think about where your strongest footing is.
Welcome to the Grow Insider Podcast Season 2. So for today's episode, I'm very happy to have Tammy. She is a former Vietnam country head of marketing at Google and Group Chief Digital Marketing Officer at MASAN Group. Tammy has over 20 years across consulting, payment, tech, and consumer goods. So she's a marketing and business leader such as MASAN Group, Google, American Express, Accenture, and Boston Consulting Group. So I first met Tammy when we both worked at Google back then, where she played a key leadership role in driving Vietnamese business growth with digital tools. So I think today we will have a lot of things to cover and to hear the insight from Tammy. So thank you, Chi, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to have you back in Vietnam and to have you nearby. It's been a couple of years since Google, but I'm appreciative to see you doing super well and building a community like this.
Thank you, Chi. The theme of the two-day conversations is how to confidently pivot your career across different functions and industry. And we would love to, go back a little bit. Where did your career actually begin? And did you ever imagine that you went through a lot of change in your career path?
I think it's a really relevant topical question. A lot of my friends are also navigating their career changes as well. But if you go back all the way to the beginning, I would say I could have never imagined the career I've had so far. For a lot of people who may not know, I'm originally from Vietnam. I left for the US when I was 7. And so you can imagine when you're an immigrant kid growing up in a predominantly immigrant community, there weren't a lot of career role models. I think I definitely looked up to our doctor. I looked up to a couple of engineers. And I actually didn't know about my options for college until I was in the 10th grade, which is very late in the grand scheme of things to start thinking about college. And so I gravitated towards the profession that I understood the most. I actually was pre-med at Stanford. I studied human biology, and I also chose to focus on international children's health and rights. At the time, if you asked me coming into college, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was like, I definitely want to be a doctor, and I want to be out in the field and serving communities in need. And while I didn't go down that path, I think that really instills me a lot of early value sets, which is, I don't know what I'm going to do, but whatever I do want it to link it back to emerging markets, where I come from, and in one way or another to make sure it has an impact. But I did pivot. I pivoted from medicine into business. And one of the toughest interview question was like, why would someone who is doing medicine be very keen on business? And it just fundamentally comes down to, do you like solving problems? Do you like helping people? If those are some of the key values that drive you in your work, then it'll take you far. But just to zoom out, my career really started with a Silicon Valley startup. I worked at a Series A startup right out of school. I did sales and I did marketing, and I pitched a product that did not even exist yet because our engineers were building it at the time. And that was my foray into business. It gave me a lot of confidence to later go on to management consulting. I was with Accenture for a while and BCG for a while, and the same ethos, right? If you love people, if you love having an impact, and you enjoy that process of problem solving, it will take you far. So for that set of years, I did that for about the first 5 to 7 years of my career. Accenture was actually the company that then brought me out to Asia, where one of my most impactful clients happens to be the International Rescue Committee that works with refugees in Thailand. And that was the anchor that also made me attracted to Asia, where I knew coming out here into the region, I would be able to contribute a lot back, but also be a part of really fast emerging markets. And then post MBA, I did my MBA at INSEAD, mainly in Singapore, sometime in France. I then anchored my career into industry. That was a big pivot, going from consulting but into industry. And I landed at American Express, leading partnerships. And partnerships led me to Google, where I managed our partner network for a couple of years across Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And as I was going to go actually leave Google for another opportunity to do that across APAC, I had another huge opportunity to take on marketing as a major remit in my leadership journey at Google. And the latest pivot, I would say, is an international move from Singapore to Vietnam. So yeah, we can certainly talk about how do you make pivots, how do you navigate changes along the way. Have not been shy about making changes. I can tell you it's daunting with every move, but definitely doable.
That's a very remarkable career journey, for 20 years that you have been through, from medicine to consulting and then to industry, especially in partnership and sales and marketing, and also across different countries as well. What is your biggest career pivots and maybe, some key lesson that you had from it?
My biggest career pivot, I would say there's actually three. And the three is centered around the pivot. Number one was going from consulting into industry. Some of your listeners may be in consulting. I learned a lot in consulting. It was a great launch pad for me. But I think for me, that was led by the desire to move from strategy into execution and seeing that execution through, and not just stopping short of advising clients. So that was number one. The second is a functional pivot, again, from sales to marketing. I actually like that these two functions work really closely together. So at the time that I was leading our channel sales business, managing revenue and our book of business, then I did a lot of go-to-market work with our clients and our partners as well. So that helped me make the transition into marketing, where I was able to bring a lot of that business acumen into the role. And then the third, I think, is moving geographically, right, from US to Asia. Singapore to Vietnam is a bit of a lighter shift, but US to Asia was a huge, huge pivot. So as someone who's made a pivot across industry, across function, and across geography at different times in my career, I would say the biggest learning that I've taken is to treat pivots the way basketball players treat pivoting or searching for the ball. So what I mean by that is you can't make a pivot on all three dimensions at the same time. Maybe you can, I certainly have, but it is a lot easier or feasible to do it when you focus on one at a time. So that's why they say in basketball, you have one foot well planted, you're scanning for the ball, you're scanning for that right opportunity, and you're trying to figure out where to pass the ball along to next. The analogy I still take with me. So I try to focus, where am I strongest? Where's my footing? So it could be, is it my industry expertise? Is it my functional expertise? Or is it like the geography where I'm at, where my network is strongest? So for anyone navigating a change, I would ask you to just lean into one of those three dimensions and think about where your strongest footing is.
I totally agree that when you try to pivoting, you need to lean on your strength and also lean on things that you feel comfortable with. Then the metaphor that Tammy shared, about playing basketball and pick and choose, the movement that work best for you when you do the pivoting is actually a great lesson. Maybe you can break it down a bit deeper. What could be the step-by-step they should start with so that they can make the confident in terms of transition in a very smooth and confident ways.
Confidence is where you can draw on a lot of examples of what you've done historically, what is your track record, what are your different signals of success. Step by step, if let's say you're about to make a transition, and I guess because we're talking about confidence, it's a moment where you're kind of doubting how to do it. Often it has helped me when I'm looking at an opportunity that I frankly have never done before, to recount on all the times that I have done something that was either really difficult and it had a really clear outcome, or something that was not in my wheelhouse. So there's plenty of times where we've done something for the very first time, right? And those are often the most painful and they come with the most lessons. But I would draw on examples of those, like, when have I never done something before, but I managed to do it? And then look for the examples of both the what and the how. What was the business impact, right? What was the challenge? What was the deliverable, the outcome? And then the how, the transferable skills that you learned as a result of that. And I know that sounds like quite generic. It's very similar to interviewing tips, but I actually think there's a lot of value in just drawing on previous examples. And there's a reason why these interviews happen when you're looking for a job or a next business opportunity. It's asking you to recount all the stories so that you can also walk into that conversation with confidence, but you can also leave the room with an impression that they should be confident in this skill set because you bring certain qualities, whether it's you're laser focused on business impact, you're hyper curious about the business, you are incredibly collaborative and persuasive with stakeholders, or you have many times demonstrated value creation even in the face of lean resources or limitations.
So I think Tammy has mentioned a little bit about the transferable values and skill that you had in your previous role and how you can share the story and the experience to add value to the next step that you are moving to. And maybe I could love to maybe go into one example. So I think right now, like I heard a lot of feedback from my community member and also young people sharing that they love both sales, partnership, and marketing. So from your experience, have hold the leadership role, a partnership at Google, and then move to marketing, product marketing in specific. What was your experience when you make the transition? What could be the top transferable skill that you easily use to transfer to the new role? And what kind of the gap that you had to fill in? And some advice for someone who want to do the same.
So for context, at the time when I was managing sales, it was very specific to the way the business was structured. I was doing sales through our channel partners. And when you are managing a portfolio of partners, it is like being the group CEO of many different business units, right? And so that was a great role for me where I was able to think about what is the product that we're going to offer, what are the pain points from the customers that we're looking to solve, what are the proof points for how do we do it, and then the go to market itself, right? How are we going to take our product to market jointly with the partner that gives strong proof points that the partner can offer the service. In this case, it was Google Ads. What are the case studies? What are the testimonials? What are the sales promise and the deliverable? So in that role, a sales role, I was really thinking end to end about how do we make a partner successful and therefore Google successful. And so that was more of a GM type of role. And I really valued that experience because while I hadn't grown up in the traditional marketing ladder as most other CMOs have, it gave me the confidence and the proof point to say, I know how to pivot, kind of like that basketball analogy. I know how to lean on my focus on figuring out what is that customer pain point and what is the solution that we're bringing to them. So I would say start with that. That is a transferable skill there. If you are obsessed with your customer, or in this case, your user, and how that product is really there to serve them. So that customer first mindset is the first one. I think the second is the ability to partner. So in a sales world, we're partnering through incentives, we're partnering through distribution, etc. In the marketing context, you're still partnering. You're partnering a lot, let's say, with your external agencies and extensions of your team to craft your message and to get the word out. So your ability to partner well internally and externally in either sales or marketing is incredibly invaluable following your focus on the customer. And then to answer your third question, your second question, right? Then what were the gaps? When I made the pivot from sales to marketing, I recognized I hadn't done a lot of the craft of creative development. That was actually something that I knew coming in. If you were to compare me to other brand marketers that have done like these massive campaigns, it was an experience that I had immediately. And fortunately for me at Google, I had incredible mentors and sponsors and bosses where we were aligned that, you have, like, let's say 80-90% of what it takes, but you're missing this key thing, which is creative excellence and creative judgment. So what we did was identify the gap, again, partner really well with your team and your managers to then fill that gap as quickly as possible. So what they did was they actually put me on a creative review board. So I was in a seat where I was able to see all the different creatives that were coming across Google and then across APAC. And that gave me just such volume of examples of what is great marketing. What does good look like? What does great look like? What requires iteration and what can you pass? And so I really learned a lot in that role, just acknowledging that I was making a pivot, but there was still a lot of room to grow and proactively filling that gap by seeking out opportunities to just let you test that muscle.
As you have pivoted into different roles, is there any time that you had in the past that you tried to pivot, but the pivot didn't feel very smooth? And is there any mismatch in expectation or learning curve? And how did you handle that challenges?
I think if we're making a pivot, back to what we were saying, with all great pivots, the reason hopefully someone pivots is also to grow, right? And if you're going to grow, there will be gaps and there should be gaps. And to overcome that gap, there should be a steep learning curve. So I would say embrace that. I have always been a nerdy kid. I think that was just an innate trait where I just knew that learning and learning really quickly was one of my superpowers. I think that is how you survive when you're an immigrant to a new community and you're doing many things that your whole family, your network is doing for the first time. So lean into that challenge of that steep learning curve. Sometimes a job can wane or get a little bit stagnant if you're no longer learning, at least in my past experience. So don't be afraid of that steep curve. Of course, like to borrow analogy, right? Like if you're mountaineering, you got to make sure you got the right equipment, you got the right team, and there's people and resources to support you in that. But don't treat steep learning curve as like a barrier for that pivot. Like that is a good thing. I think what makes a pivot maybe more difficult, though, is if there's a misalignment of values versus expectation. And what I mean by that is like with expectation, like your expectations are here and the reality is here, or vice versa, whatever it is. That's addressable when you can just recalibrate your expectation and you can work on like maybe changing the reality, but that's a mindset shift. What I mean by a value set misalignment, though, is if you find yourself in a situation that doesn't serve your values, right? And that this really means you need to understand and do a bit of reflection to understand what are those things that you value. So, for example, if someone values impact and social consequence of the work, that's a set of values. If someone values like steep learning and progressive, that's a value set, right? If you value like agility and innovation, that's a clear value set. So hopefully in these pivots, you're also looking at organizations or opportunities that really align with those values, because that's going to give you a lot of energy along the way, even on the bad days. But some of the toughest value sets may have been where there was just such a mismatch of values that I did not see myself living my value in that work context. I'll give you an example. Early on in my career, I took a 50% pay cut to move all the way from Washington, D.C. to Bangkok to work with a client whose work meant so much to me personally because they were helping refugees and they were in the nonprofit sector. While I also value financial stability, this other value of having that meaningful impact trumped it. And I felt very much engaged in the work. However, after that consulting project ended and I was placed on a different project, and I won't say which one, just out of respect for the client, I was in an environment that no longer served those values, working for a client that do not align with what I deem to be very, positively impactful. And I felt like that was a very steep, like a very difficult pivot for me to make. Even with coaching, even with reflection, at some point, if you feel your values being compromised, I would also say it's an opportunity to just do a quick check-in, right? Slow down, just ask, do I need to change my mindset? Not value set, mindset. Is the challenge that I'm working on helping me achieve other values, for example, satisfying the desire to learn? Or is it like the environment that I'm in that's going to allow me to really, really thrive? So I would say before making a pivot, just check in on like what are all the different levers that you can twist and dial to make sure that the work that you're doing is still in alignment with where you come from, your values, and also where you want to go.
We can dive a little bit more on this one because I think, let's say for a lot of working professionals, when they try to pivot or try something new, they may need a lot of help. And what you have said further is mentioned about, you need to check in with yourself, have a lot of self-awareness there, right, to understand what is your core value and where is a mismatch come from. And, one of the method that I myself found very effective for me is seeking coaching, especially with coach that are more experienced than you and someone has already been through all of that challenges and can give you some advice or a mentorship. So I know that you are also a coach. Maybe you can share a little bit more on, what would be your methodology or approach if you have the chance to coach someone on this topic.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I definitely agree with you. I think we benefit when we have coaches. I think both as a coach and as someone who has gotten coaching. I have an executive coach, for example, who hears a lot of my rumination, a lot of my thoughts that I also spare my husband from, but is a really great, helpful sounding board. Experience is one thing. Like, have they walked that journey? Have they lived through a lot of different changes or challenges or pivot? That certainly gives them a lot of empathy to be able to hold space for you so that you can share what you're going through. And if they can relate, then they input on that. I think the other is also training. Like, not everybody can be a coach. So I, for example, to really admire the fact that you've done over like 150 hours of training. You were actually trained in the discipline and the methodology, and you put it into practice. And I would say that's what great coaches do. Number one, they have coaches of their own, and they are vulnerable to accept that they also need that coaching. And I think number two, they put in the work, because out of every coaching conversation, I don't know if you experience it, but I do, right? You find a little bit of yourself, or there is a truth that the conversation unlocks about you. So it's a very mutually beneficial conversation. It's not just one way. And so in terms of my methodology, or just in general, the way that I've been trained, it's often the chemistry test. Like, not every coach will be a great fit. So I think it's okay for people to know that you can shop around for a coach. I, for example, spoke with probably 4 different coaches before I happily settled with the coach that I'm currently working with. I think number two is their own approach. There are some coaches who really like to ask a lot of questions, then like the Socratic method, so that you can come to the answers yourself. That works for some people, it doesn't work for others. And there are other coaches that are actually like really pragmatic. They don't mind leaning in and sharing a bit more of their expertise or their own vulnerability, so that you can also like resonate. And then there's a third kind that is actually like very structured and pragmatic, where it's a little bit more like outcomes based. Whether that outcome is, let me help you with your interview, let me help you with your personal branding, let me help you with whatever. And so, given there's a wide range of coaches out there, my advice to the audience is look for the coaches that you have great chemistry with. So do that chemistry test. Look for people who have done the training and ideally are certified and put in the hours. That means that they have so much experience to draw from. And then the last one is choose the right approach for you, because I can't say that there's a approach for everyone.
Thank you, Chi. Yeah, so I love that because I think coaching is really a meaningful relationship, and both coach and the one who receive coaching both have a lot of, steep learning when we go through the process. And it's pretty new in Vietnam, to be honest. I hope we'll have more and more people who will get benefit from coaching. So moving to the next question, I think this is one of the questions that a lot of people, when they try something new and aim for, let's say, a more ambitious position, they may be reading through the JD and maybe talk to the hiring manager, and they just realize, okay, I love the role, but the profile or the experience they have don't, check all the box that the manager or the company are looking for. Based on your experience, how would you give the advice for them to overcome that fear and be able to, try something new?
I love this question. And I think it's very easy for someone to say, oh, I don't check all the boxes, I won't go for it. That's silly. Just go for it. Like, your job as you're trying to pursue your best life and what you want to contribute and the impact that you want to have is to back yourself. Your job is to prove why you're the right fit. Their job is to decide, and you can't control how they do their job. But your job is to still put your best foot forward, even when you haven't fully checked the box, right? The analogy is like, you're an intern, you're trying to get your first job, and the reason you can't have your first job is you don't have prior work experience. That's ridiculous. So you got to get started somewhere. I think what has helped me really leaned into the opportunities that I feel so fortunate to have is I'm going for it. I'm not applying for everything, but I'm going for it because this is the one I want. I'm very clear on like, what can I bring to the table? And I would say be as deliberate about that. Like, make sure you're loud and clear about like, what are the top 3 reasons why you're a slam dunk fit for this? What is like your unfair competitive advantage that maybe other people don't have? And it's a hard question because that's where you need to put in the work and figure out, like, okay, how am I differentiated? But the other thing that I've really enjoyed about my career discovery is the job that I really want are the jobs I really show up for. And I think about the business problem, I research the company for sure, but the most important thing I ask is, what is the business challenge that you're facing at the moment? One of my best interviews actually was getting into Google. The context, you guys, was I had just given birth. I was like 4 month post delivery, but between nursing the baby and like putting it to sleep, I'm reading up on Google. I'm reading about the challenges. I'm reading about the industry, and I'm thinking about this team. And once I stepped into the interview, it's going really well. I remember at one point I took up a pen, a marker, and I just started drawing out the strategy. And my manager and I just went, my then manager, right, went way over time. We got so carried away into the conversation. And maybe that's not natural. I think it's a very rare situation to have happened. But basically, I had been thinking about the business problem and what I would do if I had the job, that I was able to clearly outline to him. Here's how I would approach it. Here's how I would lay it out, and we structured together. So that was a wonderful interview experience for me. And now on the flip side, I think the way interviews are done is really broken sometimes for middle management. What I mean by that is, like, okay, there's like 3 or 4 rounds. Everyone has like a functional area that they're trying to tick off. It's like an hour conversation here or there. And everyone on the interview panel, at least in tech, is just trying to go tick, 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 tick. What I love instead, and great leaders I've met do this, is they give the candidate the problem. And they say, imagine you're in the job. How would you solve it? And I love companies that think deeply about the right candidate that they want to bring in, where they're not afraid to say, come back with a presentation, come back with your strategy of how you present it. And I think candidates on the reverse side is like, oh man, you're just trying to get free work from me. But maybe, but at the same time is asking, does the candidate really want it? Are they thinking deeply about us and the problems, even when they're feeding their kid? You know what I mean? Like in their spare time. And do they bring that kind of hunger and appetite and strategy and thoughtfulness to the role and the opportunity thrive? I think as we get more senior interviews go in more of that direction. And I just love that ability to just mentally spar and engage with the founder to really just get into the heart of it. Like, what's the business problem? How can I help? So I would say, to answer your question, you're never going to check the box. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to have done this job that you've never done before. But you got to be sure, why are you a strong fit? And you got to want it by showing up that with evidence that, like, hey, I've thought really deeply about this problem and I want to help you solve it. If I meet somebody like that who wants to work with me, I'll be like, absolutely. Yeah, that hustle, I think, really helps. And then the last thing I would also say is also, you got to go for it, but you also have to go around it. What I mean by go around it is understand who else is in that sphere of influence. One of the best team members I've ever hired made sure that everyone who knew her and knew me spoke positively about her. And I thought that was just so clever. We were in the middle of interviewing and I'm walking down the hall and my colleague's like, oh, I hear you're talking to so-and-so. She's great. And that was because she, used LinkedIn and she figured out who was in her network and mine. And she was able to influence that perception. I think if you're lucky to be able to tap into overlapping networks like that, definitely have people who've worked with you vouch for how great you are. Even if it's just a mention, it also tells me as a hiring manager how hungry and resourceful you are as well.
I think there's so many great lessons that you mentioned, in your answer that I could also recap a little bit. There are a lot about leaning in to really go for it, learning fast, showing your values, proactiveness, also try to influence your network that, influence the opportunity you are tapping into. So there's so many things here. And also all the key skills such as problem solving, communication, presentation. And probably one thing I want to tap into, to Tammy and also myself as well, we started our career in consulting background, where problem solving is one of the key foundation. It's very transferable. And then I also had some question from a lot of people who say they didn't have the privilege to start in consulting. So how could they improve their problem solving mindset and skill? So what would be your advice for that?
The question is, how do I solve my problem solving mindset? Face more problems. I'm sorry, there's going to be plenty of problems for you to overcome and solve over over time. I think that's probably going to be a whole separate conversation. And I think an easier answer would be like, oh, lean into the framework, and like consulting equips you with a lot of the framework. But I would say pare it down. Like, no, just sometimes like it's not the framework. It's really, really closely paying attention to the other person. I would say more than anything, the key in problem solving is that active listening, and that active listening for what's said, but certainly what is not said. Reading it between, like reading the context as well. The other is the ability to frame the problem, because there could be many, many different problems. I certainly have had that with my previous consulting experience, where like everything is urgent and everything is disarray, but the person in the meeting room or in that conversation is able to help structure exactly like what is the problem and where do things fall, and then eventually how do we sequence and then prioritize it, I think just brings a lot more calm. So the first is active listening, the second is that structuring of that problem so you can articulate it, and the third and final one is like that energy or that presence that you bring into the conversation. This is where I love consulting. They were long hours for sure, but I love the poise that consultants can bring in, because they've seen enough problems, or they've seen enough clients do that. And the discipline of consulting allows you to also articulate, after you frame the problem, what is like the pathway to coming up with that solution, as long as you're giving space and you're actively listening for your counterparty to also give input into it.
So you have worked across different countries, Vietnam, Singapore, and the US. And as a working mom, how do you balance all of that so that you can have a successful career?
Well, I didn't start out with young kids. So early on in my 20s, it was super easy to navigate, right? I remember moving three different cities, three different offices before I got to Asia. But when my kids came along, I had to build a support network around myself. And I encourage all working families, not just women. The onus isn't on only women. But I think number one, make sure your spouse is an equal partner as best as you can. And I think in Vietnam, that's a really important message that I want to leave, because I sometimes feel there's still that asymmetric burden that's placed on women with childcare and home care and work on top of that. So Vietnam, despite having so many women percentage wise actively in the workforce, they carry a very heavy load at home. I'm happier to see amongst my friends, local Vietnamese here, where the partner is also stepping up to counterbalance that. And that will have a huge, huge positive uplift to Vietnam's economy when households are more equal. The second thing, though, is I think have access to help in childcare. So for many families, it's like counting on grandma and grandpa. That's valuable, right? Counting on affordable childcare. I would not be able to have a career without the help that I have at home, to be really honest. And that's something that's almost taboo to say in the West. And until you were there in the US, you remember how hard it was, right, to manage everything without support. But I think we need to have that honest conversation that we need to structure around working families to enable women to participate more in the workforce. I think the other is I do not hide the fact from my kids that I work. Like, for example, when they were young, if I had a super long business trip, I would bring them along back when they were portable and not in school. So that was me trying to integrate work with them. And then now that they are grown and that's not feasible anymore, I try just to commit to being present when I am present, when I am there, and try to let go of the guilt as much as possible. Because I also have experienced that no matter what age they are, there's always this lingering guilt that you're not there enough for them. But I'm really proud to see that my daughter proactively thinks about, the businesses that she wants to build, the businesses that she wants to start with me. And my son is very responsible. And I think that's a result of having support at home, but also seeing that they're also capable when mom's also not around as much.
Thank you to Tammy. So yeah, I think it's so difficult. I have two kids right now, and every day to me is like a battle. Try to balance. And I think a lot of advice that I heard from senior leader, especially woman leader, to design your career around your kid and try to integrate it instead of trying to separate it. So I think it's a great advice, but also still very difficult.
And I think that's where it's great to see women supporting each other through that as well. But I would have to say it's not just on women alone. Like, for example, women to design their career. I think that over time it will hopefully get a lot better. But even as managers, right, managers managing women, they play such a critical role in making sure that women stay in the workforce. For example, one of my best managers was a strong advocate of mine. I remember being on my maternity leave, not break, my leave, and expressing to him that, like, I feel like I've just had an amazing run, like amazing, impactful set of contribution here, but I'm afraid of being out of sight, out of mind while you're talking about promotions. And I want you to put me up for promotion. And here's why. So I advocated for myself, told my manager why I deserved it. And he, was equipped with all the ammunition to go ahead and have that conversation and fight on like our behalf. But it was really important to have a manager who also was a big, big advocate for women. There's been other great mentors I've had throughout my career when I've even asked the question, should I prioritize my career at this point or have my kid? It's such a personal decision. But if you can in your career find sponsors and mentors that care about you first and foremost, then you'll find that you'll work harder for them, you'll deliver more impact, you'll stay with the job, you'll come back to the company, and you'll be hopefully aligned more in your values of caring for your family, as well as having the career that allows you to do that. So that's a big responsibility for manager and people leaders.
Yes, I totally agree. For women to be able to be more and more successful in career, they need a supporting system, childcare support, and also have, a system, especially the company they're working as sponsor and mentor and manager to work with them, help them. Personally, as I also come from Vietnam, grew up in Vietnam and study in Vietnam. When I moved abroad to Singapore and then the US, I think the biggest challenge that I have when pivoting my career is to go international and how to balance between keeping my local identity with something I'm super proud of, but also, to become like international leader and adopt like international standard and also overcome like even language barrier, be able to become a high performer, then a good manager. What would be your advice for a local to be able to overcome all of those barriers?
Okay, so I'm going to try to start maybe local first and then outward. I think number one, what you said about that communication barrier is so, so true. But some of the smartest people didn't have perfect English, perfect pronunciation, but they found different ways to communicate. I would say, as much as you can, language is a skill, invest in that. I am certainly investing in my Vietnamese. I'm not native fluent, but I'm taking Vietnamese lessons, for example. So the level of English fluency here has increased so dramatically in Vietnam that I'm just impressed that many people are communicating across Vietnamese, English, French, so forth and so on. It's incredible. So invest in the language. I think the second is, as I've had the chance to work for a more local company, sometimes I see that the brightest minds are not afraid to have a different opinion. And I would say that's true in whatever country you're in. Like, don't be afraid to have a different opinion. And maybe that's really hard when you're not the most senior person at the table, when there is a culture that's a little bit top down. And that's actually something that I think can hold quite a lot of local talent back. If there isn't a counterculture to that says, no, I want you to bring an opinion. I want you to have a perspective. And it's okay if you have something that differs from mine. The people I've been fortunate to work with in Vietnam are most valuable to me when they also offer a local perspective that I don't know. And so that's an example of like how you can just really lean into first the communication, second that courage. And then as you're going to work more internationally, then it just comes with more practice of that, of being able to share a perspective. It certainly is true at the executive level as well. The more senior you go, the stronger in a way your convictions are, and how do you structure and frame a perspective. The ability to start young in your career, to own a perspective, to articulate it, to communicate it, and it doesn't mean like you're hard by it, you're rigid by it, but you can share that. That's a really valuable skill set to have. So I would say practice with that, but that's separate for anyone who wants to just talk about like how do you go international, this US to Asia, Asia to US. That's a whole separate conversation that I'm happy to take up. And with that, I'm really happy to just connect with members of your community as well. If they have further questions or they want to keep in touch. I think for me, this move to Vietnam is one of the biggest pivots I've ever made in my career. And so for me, what's next is I think about continuing and developing my career is focusing on building brands, building businesses, and working with young founders, really talented people and emerging companies here in Vietnam. And so I'm taking a lot of what I've done across consulting, sales, marketing, tech, FMCG, and retail to now formalize an offering and a company that will allow me to work with a portfolio of different companies. And so I invite members of the community to reach out as they're thinking about their next growth stage and how they want to scale their businesses.
After today, I could love to share a little bit more about Tammy and also the awesome plan that she are preparing to share with the member. And I think they will have some, member who are working on businesses and they would love to collaborate or just to learn from Tammy to stay connected. Once again, I would like to say thank you to Tammy for joining us today and spend your lunch time with us, which is super valuable. I learned a lot from your story, your sharing, and personally, I would like to say thank you. And I hope that, whatever next step, whatever pivot you have in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, or any other else, you will have a lot of success and support. I think moving back to Vietnam, also one of the big decisions I ever had. Also, it feels like coming home, but coming home with a lot of experience, coming home with ambition, and especially entrepreneurship is completely different game compared to a corporate game. So I wish you all the best and thank you a lot for being here with me today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate having this conversation with you and reconnecting and getting more plugged into your community, this wonderful community that you've built. It's really impressive. And that's a huge way that you're also giving back to the development and growth in Vietnam as well. So appreciate that.